All right, I think it is working. Hi, everyone. I wanted to do a quick little video. I'm on vacation for a couple weeks, so I'll have a general zest for life for about 14 days. And then I'll also have maybe time to do a few other videos as well. But I wanted to do this one because I am in the process of writing a book. I've always wanted to do that. And it has taken me many times over the past couple decades to really start with a book and to have the tools that would help me along the way. And I wanted to share some of the things that worked for me, some practical things that I've learned along the way that I think might work for you. Let me get rid of this. Might work for you as well. And especially if you are like me and what you did when you had this idea that you wanted to write about, you opened up a Word document or a notepad and started trying to write something and soon found that you just didn't have a novel ready to go. Now, if you're somebody like Stephen King, who can sit down once they have some ideas and some characters and start writing and see how things develop, that's great. But that's not like me. I am one of the types that needs to outline several times and do most of the work in that development outlining stage before even writing a single word. Now, it won't be for everybody, but let me let you in on some of the things that I have found that I guess I'll call the Sanderson-Rowling Method. King-Derson-Rowling Method. I've taken a little bit from Stephen King, who likes to kind of be a pantser. Brandon Sanderson, who heavily outlines and knows kind of he does a lot of pre-work, and JK Rowling, who I've taken a lot of the plotting method of what she does, and I'll kind of break those down for you. Now, going into this, I thought that most of the work needed to be done, and motivation as well as creativity would drive the work forward, and it does in a sense, but really what gets output, and I have found output, has been from some tools that really I needed to get for myself to be organized, as well as diligence. I needed to learn how to give myself homework and stick with it. If you are a procrastinator like me, there are some certain tools that will probably help you in that regard. Now, I have some tools that I use that I have found work for me in terms of organizing my thoughts, because for a long time I would just think this. I would develop the story in my head and sometimes write little notes down, and then I would sometimes the things that I would write down would clash. I would have ideas for a main character here and write it down and think this is a cool thing that might happen. And then I might wake up and write an email to myself on the phone so I wouldn't remember in the middle of the night and write a new scene, but it would clash with this one. And I would try to push all these scenes together, and it just didn't work that way for me. I needed to develop a new kind of philosophy for approaching it, as well as some of those tools that I'll talk about. Now, the first part of the King-Derson-Rowling method is something that I heard from Stephen King as I was looking for tips for writing a book. Now, in general, his tips wouldn't work for me at this moment because I haven't written a whole book yet, even though some of what he had to say did resonate, and it got me started. I was the type who began to just write down every little idea about anything I had, and I would try to, and it was just an organizational mess as I would try to put little notes about this character. I would think, oh, it would be cool if this character actually had this happen, and I would do that, and I would kind of chuck it onto their little document, and then it would just be 7 pages of little notes, not in order, about each of these things. Lots of it contradictory to them, to other things put in their notes, and anyway, it was just a mess, because I would think of something and then I would put it to paper and I would be married to it. And one of the things that he mentioned that resonated to me had to do with not being married to your ideas, but to let things kind of develop naturally within your mind, or however. Like, I like to write things down when I'm brainstorming and developing. Doesn't mean you can't write it down, but don't be married to the things that you are writing, as when you're getting ideas about things, or the ideas that you have about characters. Sometimes we get an initial idea that is kind of a seed for something way better, but unless we let it germinate and we water it and, give it light, it won't become anything more. So he likes to not keep an outline or a notebook, I believe, but he likes to really ponder those things. And as weeks go by and months go by, the things that he stays thinking about rise to the top. And he gets excited about some things and lets some things just die away. And I tried that. I stopped writing every little thing. Honestly, I had hundreds of pages of little notes over the last few years of things that I wanted to add to the story, and it would have just been a mess. And that just wasn't the way I needed to go about it. So instead of thinking about all these little things that I would want, I would start to ponder what kind of story I would like to tell. Some scenes would show up. I would develop those in my mind and drop some. And I guess the first thing I needed to learn was just to be patient with my ideas. I knew for me it was going to take a little while, but eventually I got to this point where I thought, now that I have been really thinking about it, and I think I have this kind of conceptual world, an idea of the main characters I would like to have in it, it's time to really get working and develop. And that's where really the Sanderson Rowling part is where the work starts to happen. So let me get rid of this, because I don't use a Word document with my planning. And I will go to, I use an app called Scrivener. A lot of you probably have heard of it if you've looked into any kind of book writing or things like that. And I have a certain set of things that I answer. And I ask about each of the characters, the plot, the setting, all of these things. And I'll go into detail with all of them. Okay, and I'll try to add timestamps or something so you can skip around. But these are the things that I have found work for me. Now, really there's a step 0, but it's mainly 6 steps. So step 0 is to prepare all my Scrivener files. I have them all here. I'll go here in a sec. But to basically eventually develop an overview, just a 1 or 2 paragraph overview of what my book is going to be about once I've pondered it and things like that. Even if you haven't pondered it, you might not even have to do that king part of it. You could probably skip to this, but in my case, it just helped. It just helped. Setting. I think about setting in terms of map, location details, global quirks, cultural society, and magic systems, and I'll show you how I break it down. And I ask a whole bunch of things regarding each of these different setting pieces. And I won't show you what I've done for mine, but I opened up a new file and kind of put some new templates that are the things that I asked myself. And I'm going to do it in terms as if I'm writing the 5th Harry Potter book, The Order of the Phoenix, because that's what I've been reading with my daughter recently. So it's fresh in my mind. And I think a lot of us would be familiar with Harry Potter. That's the one with Professor Dolores Umbridge, who everyone hates and things like that. So I thought it would be a good example. Plus, I added a few other things in there too. I have my main perspective characters, names, type, motivations, appeal, arc, and surprises. I have all these things that I want to ask for them, and I've kind of changed it a little bit. I do sort of the same thing for the minor characters and the secondary characters, where I ask a whole bunch of things, and then my plot, my main plot points, and my subplot points. And you don't have to do these in order necessarily, where you do all the setting and then do all the people and then do all the plot. For me, it started with one character that I started that had this little quirk about them that I thought would be kind of funny and interesting, and it developed. It developed into I got a subplot that happened, or a main plot that turned into a subplot later on, and new characters, and it just took on a life of its own as I worked on this. And you can kind of see it as a meshing in of all of these. And I'll tell you kind of the process I would do for each of these things. It's kind of a 3-stage process. So let me go to Scrivener, this app. Now, Scrivener has this sidebar that you can kind of organize things in folders and files, and it's all just available on the side. Now, I also have kind of a version of this. Let me just show you. Over there, I have a whiteboard that keeps my daily tasks kind of in order that I'll talk about. But I also have 3 folders. I have one that says initial stage on the bottom. I have one that says development stage and complete. And as I work on each of these, I don't like to sit in front of a computer. So I will sometimes print out some of the templates and leave big areas to write in with a pen, and I'll go sit on my couch with my feet up, and that's just how I feel I'm most comfortable doing this, because I work all day looking at a computer. I don't want to do it any more than I have to. Even though then I will bring those and sometimes punch it into the things digitally, and it's kind of a mix of both. It can be a binder. You can organize it however you want, but the principles stay the same. Now, eventually, in this step 1 is the overview. The principle I have for that is just to write a 1 or 2 paragraph summary to keep me on track of the type of book I'm writing. But also, if someone was to ask you what kind of book you're writing, you don't want to have to ramble on and not, you kind of want to be able to offer them something. And that's when you might know that you're onto something. But listen, I'm not going to worry about overview. The main parts here are world building, which includes location, the culture, maybe magic if you're doing a fantasy, or sci-fi. There's lots that can be involved. In my case, I'm writing something that's kind of within that fantasy realm, so it goes there. Then I have main characters, secondary characters, and minor characters, and plot. Now I'm going to talk about maybe I'll talk about the world building first, even though I kind of started with the main characters. And again, you kind of jump in and out of things. Now, actually, no, I'm going to do main characters because that's what I did. I have my main characters separated in terms of heroes and villains, because there just is And that's that's a kind of very general, but it just keeps it separate for me. And some characters that started in sub characters maybe were bumped into heroes, and some that were, and vice versa. Things were bumped down. Some characters that maybe started as villains maybe turned into kind of heroic things. Things just work around as you develop. But let me open up step 3, which is main characters. I will touch in all of these. Now, I just put in some fake names here, and I already did this video, and the sound was awful. Hopefully, it's not as bad this time. It had an echo, and so I already have some things in here. I added Maurice. Don't worry about that. But let's just say my main characters, or your main characters, were going to be Maurice, Ron, Hermione, and Larry as your main characters. For each of these characters, let's open up Maurice. I have a character summary and an outline. Now, I will work on the outlines first for each of these before going into writing kind of a 2 to 6 paragraph summary for each of them once I am completed it. This would kind of show my completed fruits of my labor, the summary. But let's go to the outline, because these are all the things that I would ask myself about each of these characters. And again, it doesn't have to be in any order necessarily, but when I'm doing any of these pre-outline stages, again, this Sanderson part is the pre-outline, I'm not necessarily thinking in terms of where things are happening in the story, beat by beat. I'm thinking of the types of things I would like in the story. And as you develop it, you will find, or at least I found, that some of the plot and story beats start to kind of show themselves or develop more naturally. Now, I put Maurice here because in my book, I have a character who kind of inhabits the crazy old Maurice sort of trope, or the crazy old Maurice sort of type character. I name him something else, and obviously do other things with him, but that is a starting point for me. So I knew I wanted this crazy old Maurice, like from Beauty and the Beast, type of character in my book. So I put that there. And then I had all these things that I want to talk about with him. And you can do them in any order. And this initial stage is this initial part when you open this blank template or whatever you're working on. I call this the initial stage because this is where you're doing a lot of just brainstorming. And once you've filled this out, you don't have to fill all of them out. You can fill them out as you get ideas. As you start, you can come to it during the day and add to it. But this is just the initial stage. And then you've done something with it. And then later on, you can move it to the second stage of development as you start to kind of mix these all together. But these are some things that I want to ask myself about every character, more than where they go A to Z, the type of character, and make it kind of emotionally driven and what I want to get out of every character. The type of character, their trope and purpose. Let me just make this a little bigger. Actually, that's fine. Their physical appearance, locations that they might be found in the story. Again, that's as you start to develop the location world building part of it. So you can leave that if you don't have anything to write. You don't need to write anything there yet. What makes them immediately unique? That is something that I found really drove a lot of developing characters. And I have the same principle for world building as well as plot. I want it to be initially unique, or what immediately grabs us about the character has to be interesting in some way. Doesn't have to be a huge thing, but what makes them interesting? What will we leave the story feeling about the character? One of the big things that Brandon Sanderson talks about in his lectures about writing is when you're developing a plot or a character, it's about what grabs you initially, what promises you give to the reader, sort of what the reader can expect from it, even though there will be subversions of expectations and things like that, and where it would eventually go. Now, I also already have some things in here because I was already kind of talking, and I again, the echo on the audio was terrible. Don't worry about that. But it's about finding what is interesting at the start and what kind of resolution or how we should feel about the character at the end. I mean, not the resolution here, but how we should feel about the character. What are their innate flaws? Every character probably has something that is some sort of flaw. It doesn't have to be featured necessarily in the book, but certainly for some it probably will. Innate strengths, their parentage, secrets they want to keep to themselves, secrets they will find out about themselves. Those are things that the author will know, that you can kind of leave breadcrumbs later, but things that as you're thinking about the character, they might not know that they, like in Harry's case, he didn't know he was a wizard, but he had a couple little hints in the early chapters of the first book that kind of gave an indication that something was going on. What is the opening promise to the reader about the character? In this case with Crazy Old Maurice, the opening promise is that we kind of feel bad for him. He's being made fun of, this and that there will be some sort of vindication for the character. And if that's all you know what to do with at this point, that's fine. Appeal. Why do we like reading about this character? Even if we don't like them, what makes them interesting? What frustrates us about the character, even if they're a villain or a hero? And I'll leave a template for all these questions if you want to use them. And you can these are just the questions I came up with that helped me to organize myself. And I will show what I do with these questions later. Who does this character come to mistrust? If they mistrust someone, who does this character come to trust? Or who do they already trust? What makes us hurt for this character? What makes us rejoice for the character? What do others generally think of this character? And who finally acts differently to them that, if that happens? Who kind of changes their trajectory? Motivations. What do they want? If they want something, they can want nothing, but if that's what they want, they usually want something. They're usually found in an initial state in a book, and this will help kind of drive that. What do we want for the character? The character might have some self-destructive habits that they think they want something, but as a reader, we can kind of see through that, and we want something beyond. And as you're kind of identifying these things, it will help to create some of the initial promises that we can have for them. The promises might change, and the things we want for them might change, but this is development. This is development. What is stopping them from having what we want, what they want, or what we want for them, both internally or externally? They might be in a prison or something. They might, who knows? They might have, again, these self-destructive habits. They might have bad friends. There's a million things that you could add. What are things that motivate them to progress in the story? Now, for all of these, not just heroes, but in the plot, there needs to be moments of progression that show that progress is being made. That's one of the things that really gets hammered home if you watch the Brandon Sanderson lectures, but it's also just a rule of thumb in elsewhere too, or else people are going to get bored. So what types of things can show... where am I? Oh yeah, what would motivate them to progress? I'm getting ahead of myself. What kinds of things might make them backslide? I have Gaston for crazy old Maurice. That might be something that would be destructive for him and cause him to backslide. If we're thinking of someone who has self-esteem issues, you might quickly find a whole bunch of things that could cause someone to backslide. It doesn't mean you're going into specifics, but laying out the types of things that would cause such a issue for that character. In what ways are our expectations subverted about their motivations? Now, the last part for the characters is the arc. And I kind of do this in 2 stages. How is this character introduced after I've kind of dealt with a lot of these other things? And I jump down to this character, or this part, which is what would be the most satisfying type of conclusion for this character to reach. And I think that's why people love the Sanderson books a lot, because they have this Sanderlanche where he has thought about the character that has been put into this world that he's developed. And more than just seeing where it goes, he knows the kind of satisfaction, the type of thing that would be the most satisfying. And he tries to write towards that end for that character. Doesn't mean specifics necessarily for everyone of where it's going to end, but the types of things that are going to lead towards that. So here's the arc that I've followed. How is this character introduced in their natural state with their flaws and strengths and everything? What type of incident would get them out of their natural state? In my book, I have someone who's kind of sitting at this pond for a long time, kind of depressed a little bit, doesn't want to do anything, doesn't want to help anyone. Not that he doesn't like people, but he doesn't really trust himself until he meets this squirrel that could use a little bit of help. And that moves him from his natural state into kind of beginning this adventure for him. So that's, in my situation, in my book, I talk about that type of incident that happens. And again, all of these will develop over time. What main lessons does this character need? What lessons are they equipped to eventually impart to others, if they have any? What type of roadblocks does this character need in order to kind of see victories happen? What obstacles to fix their flaws, to progress in the story? What are some small types of victories? Again, not detailed, but I mean, they can be, but we're talking about character development more than the main story yet and the plot. What types of people do they need to encounter to facilitate this progress? What would be the most satisfying type of conclusion? We talked about that. And this one here, these last 2 are, what is their emotional path from A to Z, and what is their general path from A to Z? For me, something that helped me is for the emotional path, I put 8 to 10 emojis out. Just simple emojis that would kind of show their vibe as the book goes on. And I found that incredibly useful, more than you might think. I didn't think it would be, but that was one of the things that really made sure that as I was pacing the book later on, I could look at that and go, this character might be in a very kind of depressed or somber sort of state, just very very low key. and then might be curious or might get a small little victory that makes them feel good about something. Might have worry or anger emojis. All those different things, and they can be different for every character, but eventually you're going towards this satisfying resolution for that character. And more than anything, you really can you can show that in emojis better than you might think. And then what is their general path? That is something that will be a big block. At least it was for me, where I would start to develop their arc and where they are and things like that. So I do that with every character, and this is my main characters here, and I ask all of those questions. But I also do that with the secondary characters. But in my secondary characters, as I was thinking about the types of characters I would like to have, I broke them up into different categories. I have characters of need. For thinking of Harry Potter, we might put Dobby there. And these are characters that will also evoke some kind of emotion for the reader, but don't necessarily need to be there all the time. Neville, Hagrid, just people that can show up at times, and they can have different kind of motivations. And I ask the exact same things as I do with the others, but I do it on a smaller scale. Guide or good characters, people like Dumbledore. I have Mrs. Weasley, who on one end is telling Harry and the kids to keep out of it. You don't want to be involved with the order. Let the adults do it. And then on the other end, there's Sirius, who really wants everyone to thinks that the kids are old enough to be involved, right? Polar opposites, both want good things for the characters, but they have different vibes, and you can develop these in different ways. You got Dumbledore, and then I have opposition characters like Malfoy and Snape. You can have all sorts of different secondary characters. If I open up my minor characters, I have characters like the comic relief. Fred and George might be here. Scary characters that might show up in the Forbidden Forest. You would have the scary types of characters that would be found there. And again, you have this locations area that eventually you can kind of peg these into where they are found, and we'll get to timeline type stuff later. Obnoxious characters, you can have a whole bunch of different things. But that's how I eventually develop each of these. I start with an initial stage for all of them, and then as I go on with everything, I'll do a development stage, and then hopefully get to a completed stage with each of them. Sometimes dropping some, morphing them a little bit, but eventually having development for all of them, but also having this summary that I can draw on after I've done each of these. The minor characters would just be a paragraph or two. The major ones could be 4 or 5 or 6 paragraphs or however long, but I try to keep it quite simple. Let me go to world building now, because that was kind of the second thing that happened with me. Now, you can have a map. You can put any of this in there. I start with the locations, or I have the map. In Harry Potter, you might have Hogwarts, the Order Headquarters, Department of Mysteries, Room of Requirement, a million other things. Those are just some that I put there. And these are some questions that I have for each of these. In my story, I have this cliff. That's, for some people, it would be a cliff. For other people, it would be a wall. And so I started with this general map and idea. And then for each of the main areas, I would ask these things for each of them. So for the cliff, I have it under Hogwarts, but I have cliff here. I would do a brief summary after I've asked all these questions, a map if needed, pictures if needed, just things for reference. For me, my first question was, what symbolism might this location represent for the characters? Now, that's a weird question because I don't want my book to be allegorical in any way, but also there are some things that I think kept me on track, like this cliff for the people at the wall. Characters would reach this wall, and it physically was a barrier for them, but also they would reach this moment in their story where they would kind of get, or at least in this main character, a couple characters, they would reach this wall at the same point they are kind of hitting a wall. Okay, so I put that there, and it just kept me focused that way. What does it look like? What are we immediately drawn to? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? Are there fictional or real world comparisons? I draw on history sometimes. I have a forest in mind. You might put a fairy tale enchanted forest if you want to have that start as kind of a base for what you want to go on, or the forbidden forest if you were thinking about Harry Potter. It kind of gives you a base to go on to get the tone, but you can build this however you want so that when you get there, you can draw on what you've done here when you're writing, and you already have all this figured out, so you're not figuring it out on the fly. Why is this place immediately cool? Now that is a question that I found really drove a lot of this work, because I wanted everything to immediately be interesting in some way. It doesn't mean it had to be flashy and anything like that, but I want something to pop in every place, or just have some kind of vibe that makes it interesting for the reader. What creatures or people are typically found there? What is the vibe of the people there? What secret dangers does this place hold? This is one of those things where the author might know things that the characters don't. And then you can, and eventually we'll kind of develop some of the breadcrumbs into helping the reader understand what's really going on with a place. Same principle with people and the plot. What secrets or dangers does this place hold? What are hints that give some of these things away? Again, it doesn't have to be specific, but if we're talking about a place that used to be a graveyard for mummies or whatever, you might talk about some of the things that would help the reader and the characters eventually understand those things without just saying that. Make sense? Location-specific quirks and enchantments or magic or things like that. We'll talk about the quirks and enchantments. Why would people seek this place? Why would people fear this place? Again, you can answer a whole bunch of other questions about that. And you can add questions. Sociopolitical location history. This might be a place where an evil company has typically been, and all this nefarious stuff has been here. Rumors about this location, and that might clash with what we know is actually going on. But it's important to know these things. Geographic changes that could happen to that location, or that has happened in the location. Changes that could be made there that would make it better or more sinister or whatever. That's just what I did to get my mind going. That would be interesting as the story unfolds. And I do that for each of my locations. And as I'm doing this, I'm also thinking about my characters, who would be interesting as they interact with some of these locations. Culture, society, and religion. Important. I have Death Eaters, Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore's Army, Ministry Elites, the Giants, Gryffindor Quidditch team. It can be a whole bunch of things. It could be way more than this. It can be way less than this. But these are also things that are as part of the world building that are much of the same kinds of things I've asked about the other things, but are good to know. And I'll let you know kind of how I use this in the Rowling part, the plotting part. What are basic values? Talking about the Death Eaters, what are basic values of this group, society, or religion? They follow Voldemort. They hate Muggles. They hate half-breeds. They are wanting to destroy this and this and that. They want control. You can answer those kinds of questions. Where did it come from? What's their history? Are there any offshoots of this group? What are their foundational figureheads, if they have some, who are a part of this culture, society, or religion? Again, going back to the characters, or it can be characters that are found in the story, or it can be characters referred to from a history far back, or whatever it ends up being. You put it here. Who can join? How do they recruit? What makes it interesting? Why is it immediately interesting? Important to know. What is the initial promise to the reader about this group? I mean, if you're going to say one thing about them, you can subvert expectations, but it has to have some kind of development of what we know, or pay off somehow. Initial promise. What are their basic values? What are their basic fears? What is their utopian vision? You don't have to fill all of these in super detail, but these are some important things you might want to ask. What is admirable about them? What is deplorable about them? What secrets do they hold? What things do they not know about their history or foundation? As an author, you would know that. What are their sources of knowledge? Are there people that know the things about them? What do they? If it's a religion, is it a book? Is it tomes? Is it runes? Do they look in the sky at the stars if they're the centaurs? All these things to ask, and they're good to ask at this moment when you're planning these things, because then your mind starts to turn. At least it does for me when we get to really developing the plot and the subplot. Fictional or real world comparisons sometimes can be a great resource. What would be cool moments of progress for this group? What would be a cool resolution for this group? Quirks and Magic. I put Allomancy. For those familiar with Mistborn from Brandon Sanderson, and for those that aren't, it's this magic system that involves metals, where certain kind of powers can be had based on the types of metals interacted with. That could be this type of magic that exists. I also put broccoli can make people temporarily invisible. Now, it can be something as simple as that, and we can develop it. But these are some of the things that I ask about that. What is the nature of the magic? How does it affect the world? Who is linked to it? Again, what are the locations linked to it? This is when you're starting to really mesh things. Why is it immediately cool? How does it negatively impact the world? How does it benefit the world? What are the costs of overuse? Think of the One Ring from The Lord of the Rings. How does it negatively impact the world? What are the costs of its use? Whenever Frodo puts it on, it kind of seems to tap some of his essence away and make him a little bit more like Gollum. And as well, the ring wraiths can sense it. So those are some things like that. In my story, I have these tier vial kind of things that I've been developing for my book. Rules and constraints, potential to make it more awesome. When you read it out loud, you realize where your spelling mistakes are. What is the lore tradition about this quirk or magic system? Again, it doesn't have to be magic. It could be that maybe there's a never-ending twilight in the world where the sun never goes down. What's the lore about it? What do the characters feel about what's going on? But what is really going on? Again, that's when you start to also, as an author, you know what's going on, and you start to leave breadcrumbs, and we can talk about how that gets developed, or at least how it's worked for me to develop that. How many of those things exist? In my case, tear vials. Why would it be a very bad thing in the wrong hands? What would be cool usage of this quirk or magic in the right or the wrong hands? How would this quirk or magic be devastating for certain characters? Perhaps it would kill someone, or it could really turn bad. We've seen examples of that in basically all fantasy, almost, at least classical fantasy. What are some moments of progress that show that this quirk or magic system is being more understood, or being used, or anything like that? And what would be some cool resolution for this quirk or magic? Now I'll get to plot. I have it divided into main plot and subplot points. Now, some points might go up to main plot, some might go down to subplots as it develops. What I did at the start when I went to Google and I copy and pasted a whole list of different kinds of plot, and I put it here, and I just highlighted some things that kind of fit some of the stuff that I wanted in my book that seemed to work with the world building as well as the characters. It didn't mean I used all of these, but it got my mind going, and so I highlighted them. And when I was thinking of maybe something that could sort of happen with one of the main characters or the side characters or minor characters, I would sometimes go here just to get my mind thinking, and then I would start to develop the plot points. Now, main plot for this fifth Harry Potter book might be Voldemort's back, Ministry interference with Hogwarts / Umbridge, Dumbledore's army, and you could have a whole bunch more. Subplots might be where's Hagrid, what's up with Dumbledore, Sirius, Harry's dreams, Ron's confidence, Luna, what's up with her, Harry's seeing invisible horses, what's up with that, and people's thumbs are falling off. I know that's not in the book, but again, you can just add things like that, and it gets your mind going. Now, these are some things that I ask myself when I'm developing these plot points. And this is where you can start to think a little bit more in terms of timeline. And I don't always leave these at the end. These are some of the first things I actually do while I'm developing the characters. But again, I guess I don't need to keep saying that over and over. But some things, I would say the plot name, not really that important though. What is the plot problem? Is it physical danger, tension? Is it an obstacle? Is it someone needs to just, we think, is it a love story that there's certain people that we want to get together? It can be all sorts of things. What plot type? Again, this kind of draws back to this types of plot. Is it a comedy, a hero's journey, a tragedy, voyage and return, rebirth, love story? Any of those things. Those are just examples. What is the feeling that this plot or subplot point is supposed to evoke? Who is most affected by this? Could it affect others, and who? Where did this plot or problem begin? What types of individuals or circumstances could see this plot problem resolved? Like, who's equipped with handling it? What is the unique position to fix the plot, or who is in the unique position to fix the plot or problem. Usually we can start to see that as it happens, but as we, and this will help for plotting later on. Again, I keep saying that too. Who has the answers to this plot or problem, if anyone does? Why would this be sad, scary, ominous, exciting, or happy, or any more things? Are there specific locations linked to it? And again, the golden questions. Why is this plot or problem interesting? Because it's got to be interesting. That's what drives it, even more than the world. I think matching cool characters with interesting plot is important. What are some initial plot promises to give to the reader? Doesn't mean we have to resolve it in exactly that way, but it has to give some kind of something that makes the reader want to turn another page, do another chapter, and see what happens. If it's just meandering and being reactive to things going on, at least I started doing that with my book at the start. It just gets flat so quick, but this has helped me a lot. What's at stake? How could it get worse? Are there time constraints? Is this a ticking time bomb? And then this, much like the character development, I think about the introduction stages of this plot. Who's involved with it? Why is it interesting? What promises? Why should we care about it? And then think about a satisfying resolution that we would like to get out of it. Not necessarily where it's going to end, but the type of resolution that would leave the reader happy that they went on that journey. And in my case, I like to have it emotionally driven. Not emotional as in it's going to make you sad or it should evoke something. And then once I have those, I can start to develop the middle progress or in rising action, the climax and the falling action, and make sure I've tied off loose ends. And then here I have any red herrings that might be relevant to this plot point, and some hints for the reader that would be relevant along the way to really help understand what's happening and to help also show that progress is being made. And I will show it for all of these things. Now, that's everything for the pre-outline stage. And it's a lot. But if you are like me and you need some organization, that is something that might help. Now, I do, as I mentioned, I have these files on the wall. I also have this whiteboard. This is one of the most useful tools that I have. Every morning, I will look at my whiteboard, or every Monday especially, I will look at my whiteboard and I will plan some things that I want to have developed for that week. It could be an initial stage of just starting thinking about any of these things. It can be a character, a location. It can be whatever I'm feeling that I am ready to really tackle that week. In my case, I have this squirrel subplot that I was developing more this week. This prince developing. Crazy old Maurice doing the initial stages of what I was mentioning, just really answering these questions. And then the initial stages is answering it the first time, and then developing is usually I like to let it sit for a few days at least before I go back to a subplot or character or location and do a development stage. Take it back out and really see what I've done and get new ideas and see how it all fits in. Greg, the cliff. And then also at the bottom, I have things I'd like to read. I want to go back this week. I haven't done this. I'm going to do this weekend. Read some of the chapters about Sulla, in my case. In the book Rubicon by Tom Holland, it talks about ancient Rome, and there's this dictator that I want to draw on a little bit for the villain of my character. I'm looking at the screen. I should be looking up at you. Also, I want to actually read The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think it will help with one of the characters specifically, at least getting some of the vibe of what the Hunchback would have gone through. I think it'll help me a little bit to draw on. So every Monday I choose those, and then I put those into the days that I want to develop those things, and it feels so good to erase it after I have done that. And I have to kind of gamify the whole progress, the whole thing. And this is where diligence comes into place, and giving yourself homework and actually doing the homework. As long as, more than being brilliant or brilliantly creative, as long as I do this homework, I know that I'm making progress towards the overall goal. Now, I'll talk really, really briefly once I've developed all of this. And again, the second part is plotting, and it's something that JK Rowling did for her books, where she would know everything about what's happening and kind of plot where things take place. And I'll talk about that a little bit. And I've done a little bit. I did a little bit of that at the same time while I was outlining. But really, it was definitely the final phase of this kind of outlining part. Actually, not even quite then. But let me give a quick example. I would suggest going and maybe looking at a few videos of how she did it, but I'll give a quick look. Now, what she did is she got on paper. In my case, I just use Excel because it's easy to use. I have experience with it, easy to move things around, and it just works for me. But the first thing is to set, let me open up a new page. I space these out a little bit. Time frame, I'll give, I'll just do a general table. Time frame. And in her case, her books would almost always start, I think they always start in summer. And then this is the time frame of the books themselves, usually going from summer and ending at the end of term in June. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a timeline of the things that have happened way before. It doesn't mean you have to break them in groups of months. In my case, that wasn't what I needed. I needed to think in terms of scenes regarding where my main character, I knew he was going to go. I knew he was going to start at this pond. I knew he was going to enter a forest. I knew he was going to get to this cliff, and then on from there. So I put it kind of in that time frame, but also tried to and then tried to kind of develop how many weeks and days and things he would be in each of these moments. But to develop a time frame is the most important part. And again, you can do things that are way in the past or way in the future, just anything that's going to be relevant that has happened in your world. And then putting in characters. Reese, Larry, Ron, Hermione, just all your characters, and these columns can go on forever. If we're Umbridge, Hagrid, Neville, you see what I mean? And once I've also done that, Yeah, so put in all my main characters, secondary characters, minor characters. Also, put in my my plot points. Voldemort is back. Where is Hagrid? Luna's weird. I won't do that. But all my plot points. What other ones did I have? Harry's dreams. Sirius. Now, the reason this has worked for me, and it seems to have worked for JK Rowling, is that this makes it so when you're writing, you're not having to keep all of these different things in your head at all times and thinking, would this be a good time to give a hint about this or a red herring about this or to show progress here? Because that's just too much. Even if you're just going to an outline, and traditionally when you're writing a history paper or a short story, you're writing point 1, or 1A, 1B, 1C. And if you did that with all of these plot points, it would just would be a mess. That's how I started doing it, and it was just a mess. But you can start to see, you can bring up these characters who you've completed, the characters in the plot where you've completed what you wanted to do with each of them, and you can start to kind of plug them in. Maybe we don't meet Larry till December, and we see him in his natural state, and he's going to have resolution at the end of the book. And you can start to see, I didn't need to write Larry there, but you can start to see hint about Larry being a werewolf or whatever. If this was Lupin. Let me actually do that because that's a good idea. Lupin, we meet him. We find out that he is a werewolf. Reveal. They go to that class where there's the white orb that's supposed to be the moon, but we don't really know that. Defense against the dark arts class. Moon reveal. And you start to just do these things, but you also do these as they resolve things for the character, you link them with other characters that might be near them. You can and you make sure these plots go forward. And also you're thinking in terms of scenes and chapters. So once you start to plug these in, you can see where things are heavily kind of info dumpy, or just too much information at one time, or quite sparse. You can throw in some little things that would give hints towards things. And once you have all of these down, and this is what's worked for me, that makes it so when you're writing, let's say we get to October, I can hide. I can get to October. I can look through that entire timeline of everything I want to accomplish in that scene or chapter, and break them apart. It doesn't mean they're all in one scene, but all those things that I want to accomplish there, and I can get them out of my mind. Really, when I was starting writing this, I had all these things that I would, in my mind, imagine a whole bunch of open boxes that I had to remember what was in each box. But if you did your due diligence and you have it organized, and this helps me organize, it made it so I can close all of the boxes and open just the mental box that is relevant for this moment. and then I can write a little chapter summary if I want of the things, the vibe for that time, kind of what we want to get out of it, why it's interesting, and then I could start writing and not be so worried about forgetting all these things that I'm trying to juggle. It makes it so you don't have to, and that's something that has worked for me. This has been rambly, but I hope that will help. If you do something like this or have something that would be better, please let me know, because I am trying also to become better at this. These are just the things that have worked for me, that I've finally seen some success with. Let me know maybe if some of these things have kind of lit a light bulb and make sense to you. Let me know what works for you. Now I have the last phases is sorry, and then before finishing the plotting stage, then you can go in and make a proper outline if you want, with the 1A, 1B, 1C. And if you want, you can do your whole book that way. And then you can kind of see how it all comes together. And it might help to organize that. Now, then comes the drafting phase. Now, I loved the initial creation of this, but eventually you need to get something down on paper. And for me, I've had to turn my internal editor off and just get something down. I will talk about the editing and drafting phases later if you would like. There are some tools that I think are great. Pro Writing Aid is an invaluable resource for me. As far as there's a million different things that have helped, that kind of especially help a new writer like me. And I hope this has been enjoyable. I hope that this has been informative. I'm not an expert on these things, but I hope some of these tools maybe got your mind going if you've reached a little bit of a slump and you would like to write something. And I hope to see you on the next video, whenever that is. But I'm on vacation, so who knows when. Bye.